What is the most disturbing thing to know? I work as an anesthesiologist. I've put people to sleep in an emergency situation knowing that they will almost certainly not survive the surgery. These are generally situations where without surgery the patient will not survive, but even with surgery the chances of survival are still small. In most of these instances the patients are too obtunded or aren't conscious enough to be aware of the gravity of their situation, but in a number of instances the patients have been conscious, talking although clearly anxious. I try to reassure and tell the person that we won't leave their side, that we will take care of them and that they will be fine. It kind of fucks me up a bit to say this to someone, but I always include the last part because I just don't see the point in telling them the truth. I had one guy tell me he felt like he wasn't going to make it. I told him he would make it but knew he wasn't going to. I put him to sleep knowing that the last human face he would see before he died was mine as he stared up at me as I held an oxygen mask over his mouth and nose. I'd consider myself quite a resilient person, but knowing this stuff is a bit of a load to carry around. That the adults don't know what's going on either. Reminds me of a quote, "Anyone who isn't confused doesn't really understand the situation." There's another one that I don't know exactly, but it goes something like, when you reach the age your parents had you, and realize they were people just like you who also didn't have a clue. I worked as a palliative carer for about 3 years. I looked after terminally ill people who had chosen to die at home after being discharged from hospital. After a while, you learn some telltale signs that people are deteriorating. After a bit longer, you start to learn how long people generally have left, even down to a few hours. I always went with honesty. I felt it was my job to support the patients' families as well as the patients, so if they asked how long I thought they had left I would answer honestly, obviously with the disclaimer that I wasn't a doctor and I could only base it on my previous experiences. The wife of one of my patients told me that their children, adults, were visiting the following weekend to say their goodbyes. I had to decide carefully on what to say next, but I ultimately chose to recommend that they visit the following day, at the latest. I regretted saying it because she was devastated. She took my advice and her husband passed away peacefully 48 hours later, after seeing his kids. I'm glad I did it, but upsetting that lady was absolutely gut-wrenching. Some people didn't want to know, and it was their right not to know. That was the worst. In those cases, you had to not say anything. Sometimes they'd say "see you tomorrow" and I had to reply, "Yes, have a good night and I'll see you in the morning," knowing full well that they were going to pass in the night. Edit. Wow, thank you all for your kind words. It is a very difficult but rewarding job. I am no longer a carer, but I often think about whether I would be able to do it again. I've had one question asked a lot in the replies, so I'll answer it here. Death, like life, is different for everybody. Certain conditions will cause the body to deteriorate in different ways. I'm going to spoiler this next bit because it might be too much for some to read. COPD was a common condition I saw, that was a gradual decline until the patient could no longer breathe and the oxygen just wasn't able to get in anymore. Heart failure was similar, a very drawn-out process. I cared for a lot of cancer patients, some younger than my parents, which was quite distressing. What tended to happen was the symptoms they already presented would worsen, beyond the point that their medication could alleviate it. They would lose energy, ultimately being bedbound. The biggest giveaway was when they no longer wanted to drink water. That was usually a 72-hour warning. When they were very close, their skin would start to mottle and go pink/purple. I'm not 100% sure why it happened, but I think it was because the heart was struggling to get the blood around and it would settle. However, generally you could just tell that the person you'd been seeing for days, weeks, months or even years just wasn't the same as they were a few days before. Changes could be gradual or sudden. I went to work with the philosophy that death comes for everybody. If it were me being cared for, then I would want to be cared for in a certain way, the way I tried to care for everybody whose homes I entered. Early childhood malnutrition, between ages 0 to 5, causes irreversible loss of IQ, 11 to 20 points, and predisposes people to higher levels of violence. Prefrontal cortex doesn't develop the same. And if you miss that window, there's no intervention that can recover the gap. I live in South Africa, highest Gini coefficient in the world, highest unemployment, third highest violent crime rate, one of the worst education systems in the world, and it fucking keeps me up at night. I wonder, if we changed nothing except introducing a one nutritious meal per day feeding scheme for our ECD, what would happen? It hurts. Edit. Firstly, thank you for the awards, comments, and messages. It is truly touching that you are all as moved by this as I am. I am unable to respond to everything. but I appreciate knowing that so many people have felt and thought strongly enough about this to want to participate in changing it. Cruise liners all have a morgue for all the passengers that inevitably die each trip. What an odd way to describe the ocean. Old people love going on cruises. The ocean is God's waiting room. Cruises are for the newlywed, and nearly dead. That this post is going to be a BuzzFeed article in about half a week and there's nothing you can do about it. By the time you show the symptoms of rabies, it's already too late. It can also be dormant for a year before you show those symptoms. I have a real fear of rabies because of this. If you ever find a bat in your house, or anywhere you have slept, get the rabies shots. Bats can bite or scratch you and you sometimes won't even notice, especially if you were asleep. Hotels rarely clean their ice machines. I've only worked one place ever that soaked their fountain nozzles in diluted cleaner overnight. No one else cleaned them. There are lots of nooks and crannies inside them. That's what your soda goes through. That there is anywhere between 25 to 50 active serial killers in the United States, according to the FBI. Yet, you're still far more likely to be murdered by someone you know and trust. There are spiders that capture bats in South America. There's some spiders that eat birds in Australia. They look nasty. The youngest person to ever give birth was 5 years old. Lena Medina. Just think of what happened to the poor girl. Was raped by an uncle, at the village they all lived at. She went through labor, kid was raised as her brother until they both were old enough to explain the situation. The family was never charged because they lived in ignorance until doctors checked her and due to the abuse, could have started 1 to 2 years old, her body advanced puberty. She later became a nurse and moved to the capital of Peru. And has had a healthy relationship with her son. Edit, people, this is what was told to me by people growing up in Peru. Personally, I honestly think people need to stop talking about Ms. Medina. She does not deserve to constantly kept being spoken about. Is traumatic. Imagine this shit happening to you and nobody fucks off about it. That the majority of humans will wait until life-threatening problems become unsolvable before they try to fix them. If we see a life-threatening meteor is going to strike us in a few years, we probably, at least at the moment, couldn't do anything about it. They've had training simulations with this exact scenario, and they only got it right like 10% of the time. They need more like 10 years to reliably and consistently stop it. A dying person's eyes will sometimes go from closed to shooting wide open as they pass. Source: personal observation. Unfortunately. Edit, to clarify, this happened to my father-in-law and I was present. My heart goes out to everyone else who has lost loved ones. Even though the eyes opening was certainly disturbing, being able to have him die at home as he wished and us being there with him at the end was a positive experience that I've made peace with. Thanks for the awards and it's nice discussing with everyone. Prions. They are proteins that make normal proteins in your brain fold abnormally, causing neurological decay and various prion diseases. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is one example. CJD may occur spontaneously, be inherited, or be transmitted by contact with infected tissue, such as during a transplant or from eating contaminated meat. Once this starts, it's 100% fatal. Most often within 1 year, you're dead. No cure. You can kill the prion, with several hours of heat at 900 F. This obviously kills the person too. Thankfully it's rare. Less than 1,000 cases per year in the US. Still scares the shit out of me. Edit, I've never met anyone who had this, or anyone with a family member that had this. But so many responses here are sharing their experiences. Thank you for your stories, and I'm sorry for your loss. One of the scariest and most disturbing thing I've watched in the internet is that one guy's slow descent to insanity because its brain lost its ability to sleep. He vlogged regularly until he died. That's one of the most disturbing things I know, that anyone, including myself, can have their last sleep without knowing it. Edit, Ricard Sajian's channel for those who asked. Edit 2, DL, DW, the guy had a UTI. He didn't have insurance so he took an antibiotic. After 2 weeks, he lost his ability to sleep because of the side effect of that antibiotic. Llama spit is actually projectile vomit. That at some point, you will hang out with a group of close friends for the last time, and not even know it. You'll assume there will be a next time, but that's it. The liver can be ruptured in one punch. Liver is the second most fragile organ in the human body. Edit, well fuck, lots of people seem interested, do with this knowledge as you wish. Edit 2, I'm using fragile to mean susceptibility to damage, not sensitivity. What's the most fragile? The brain. That there are parents out there that willfully sell their children into sex slavery or force them into prostitution. I remember reading a news story about an infant that had been sexually abused by the mom's boyfriend, and I absolutely lost it. An infant. Not that children make any sense either, but a baby? It's beyond comprehension. There are about 6 US nuclear weapons that are currently unaccounted for, Broken Arrow, and several times that number missing from Russia. Edit: I'm being told it's technically empty quiver, but Broken Arrows sounds at least 30% cooler, so I'm running with it. I don't know what's scarier, losing nuclear weapons, or that it happens so often there's actually a term for it. A Missouri court famously handled the case of Celia, a slave who killed her owner in 1855 while fighting a sexual assault. In such situations, state law considered any woman to be acting in self-defense. However, the court determined that Celia was not a woman in the sense of the law. She was a slave, and her owner had complete control over her. She was given the death penalty by the court. Since she was pregnant, however, her execution was postponed until the child was born, so as not to deprive her owner's successors of their property rights. For another disturbing piece of history, look up the 1918 lynching of Mary Turner in Georgia. She was woman enough to bear a child but not woman enough to have basic human rights. Fuck that. A manatee vagina is the most anatomically similar to a human one. They are also thought to be the inspiration for mermaids in folklore. Putting those two facts together makes things really weird and disturbing if you think about it. Sounds like the last time I got kicked out of SeaWorld. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more videos.